here we are again. Another episode of DIY, more or less. Today, Venza 2011 needs new shocks and struts. Actually, Strut Assemblies. Been making all kinds of noise for a while, so not too difficult. With a little patience and hopefully with the details that I'll provide you here, we'll walk you through it. I think it's something that you can do and definitely save you a ton of money. I've already done the other side. This is the back right. I've already done the back left. Thought we'd go ahead and show this one, how we're doing it in detail, and give you the opportunity to decide whether or not this is something that you want to do yourself. So with that, let's get to it. All right, it's tool time. So let's get started. I'll admit it, I might have over-tooled just a bit, but I hate in the middle of a project having to go run and get a tool that I've forgotten. So hopefully this covers us. So let's get started. We'll start by removing the back right tire. This is the easy part of the project. Pro note, loosen the lug nuts on the wheel before jacking the vehicle up, else you'll be working on a free spinning wheel. After your wheel clears the ground, finish removing the lug nuts with your impact drill or tire iron, then remove the wheel from the hub. Also, instead of relying on the floor jack to hold your vehicle up during this project, it's a good idea to slide a jack stand underneath the vehicle. A jack stand is safer, stronger, and less prone to movement once in place. Once you've removed the wheel, you'll expose the strut assembly, and we can begin disassembly. But before we begin disassembly, let's take a look at the reason we're replacing this strut package in the first place. As you can see, the boot that is supposed to cover that shock absorber shaft is completely torn and is allowing road grime and debris to get inside the shock and slowly break this shock down. That's a squeaking noise we're hearing, and the shock itself is beginning to degrade and will eventually fail completely. Is this what your shock looks like? Let me know down in the comments. I'd be interested in knowing how bad your shocks look, sound, or feel. It's now time to uninstall the strut assembly. The first nut and bolt that I'll remove is located at the top of the rear suspension arm. It'll need the road grime cleaned off so you can access the area. The fastener used here is a nut screwed into a hollowed out Allen head bolt, which inserts through the top eye of the suspension arm from the back. I found the Allen hole was completely caked with road grime, so I had to pull out my trusty old wood punch and dig out the dirt from the inside of the Allen hole. Much to my surprise and relief, I was able to hand knock that nut loose without the need to insert the Allen wrench. Let's hope the rest of my fasteners cooperate the same way. Once I remove the nut, I reposition my hands around the back of the strut assembly, pushed down on the hub assembly, and pulled the top of the armature out of the shock mount. Step 1 complete. The next step in this disassembly process is to remove the brake line and the ABS wheel sensor line harnesses. This shock is coming out and we want everything off of it. We'll remove the brake line harness first and get it out of the way. Little housekeeping tip for you. Screw these removed bolts onto the new strut assembly so you don't lose them. I'll now change out my socket to a 10mm and then remove the ABS wheel sensor line harness. Stow that bolt on the new strut assembly. Once complete, we're finished with step 2. The next connection point we'll be disassembling is the caliper mounting bolts. These are very large nuts, so I'll be using my 1/2-inch cordless impact driver to loosen them. The top nut came loose pretty easily. Good start. 1 down. I had more problems with the lower nut. I had to hit it several times with the impact driver. Fortunately, it finally came loose. Pro tip and word of caution. If either of these nuts won't loosen, you can heat up the nut with a propane torch. However, word of caution, be very careful working around your brake and ABS sensor lines when introducing a flame. This can be a tight working space and you don't want to damage these lines. Next, we need to remove the caliper mounting bolts from the rear knuckle. These bolts will be under tension, so you'll need to lift your rotor in order to push your bolts out. Once these two bolts are out, it's time to turn our attention to the connections at the top of the strut assembly. I've already removed the cover, which pops off real easy by using a little screwdriver underneath the end and popping it up. You can see these three little tension clips that hold it in place. Let's get some light in here so we can see what we're doing. To release the strut assembly from the vehicle, the only thing holding it in place right now is these three nuts. There will be tension on these nuts because they're the only thing still holding the strut to the vehicle. I'm going to make a quick visual check of where the strut is to make sure that if it falls, it's not going to damage anything. Everything looks good, so let's proceed. Once the nuts have been removed, it's time to return to the wheel well to remove the strut assembly. It comes out real easily, however, be careful of the hoses. Just move slowly and cautiously when you're pulling it out. You'll be fine. Old strut removed, step complete. Now that the old strut assembly is out, we are officially halfway done with this project. So, next step is to install the new strut assembly. Up to this point, you should have been able to complete the removal of the strut assembly by yourself. At this halfway point, however, this would be a good time to call in a second pair of hands, aka one of those two-leggers that eats all your food. You'll need that extra set of hands for the next step. At the top of your strut assembly, you'll recall you have three bolts that need to be aligned with the holes at the top of your wheel well. Getting the bolts in the holes is only half the battle. You'll need that extra set of hands to place the nuts on the bolts once the strut assembly is in place. Quick tip. Don't tighten the three nuts at the top of the strut assembly. You'll need these loose in order to assemble the bottom of the strut to the hub. The next step is the last major mechanical step other than putting the wheel back on. This will be assembling the new strut to the hub. This will involve reinserting the two large strut bolts through the holes in the strut and the hub. This is where the loose nuts at the top of the strut assembly will pay dividends by allowing you to manipulate the strut to better align with the hub. With the strut assembly hanging down next to the hub, you'll need to adjust the strut to fit the hub inside the U channel of the strut. Once properly positioned, you'll then need to lift the hub to align the holes between the strut assembly and the hub. Here's a DIY tip. Place your floor jack under the hub to raise it for aligning the holes for inserting the large bolts. I started with the lower hole and inserted the first bolt there. Remember to insert the bolt in the same direction as you took it out. Secondly, when inserting the bolt, ensure to seat the bolt all the way through to the bolt head. This is where using the floor jack really pays off for aligning the holes. Once the lower strut bolt is in place, the top bolt is easier to work with because it's basically already aligned. Hand tighten the nuts. Then finalize tighten the nuts with a torque wrench set to 214 pounds for both the top and the bottom nuts. When finished, don't forget to return back to the top of the strut and fully tighten the three nuts. We are finally in the home stretch of this project, so we'll breeze through these last few steps. First, we'll reattach the brake line and ABS sensor hoses to the strut assembly mount. Once mounted, tighten both bolts firmly, preferably with a socket and ratchet set. The last step will be reattaching the rear suspension arm. Like I did when I uninstalled the arm, I'll reach around the back of the strut assembly, like I'm giving it a big old bear hug, and then take both hands and press down on the suspension arm in order to align the top bolt into the strut assembly bracket. Once the arm is secured, hand tighten the nut, then follow with your wrench and Allen tool to firmly tighten this connection. You, my friend, have successfully replaced your strut assembly. Confidence builder? I hope so. Whether on a 2011 Venza or a similar Toyota, you just saved yourself $300 to $400. In this day and age, when every penny counts, that's a bunch of money. I hope this video helped you discover that you got this. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future money-saving projects. Till next time, this is Les with DIY More or Less.